He is Conny Reuter. He is the General Secretary of Solidar, which is something like the umbrella organization of European Sozialverbände, social federations. Conny, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, Solidar is just an NGO. It's one of these demobilized NGOs which are completely desperate and do nothing against the crisis because everybody stays in its office and is not active. So, you know, but we are very active in Brussels. Now, the reality is another. First of all, you should know we are a network of 59 organizations all over Europe. And for sure, not all in our members, in our membership, they work on the ground and they are not all concerned in general by these debates we have today here. But on the other side, if we speak on the social realities, we have mentioned 26 million unemployed, 25 million working poor, 120 million people living in or at the threat of poverty. If you look to the development of long-term unemployment in Europe, there is a contribution which is very essential. When the work of the trade union ends, our work starts. When there is no more social dialogue and people lose their job, then that people are living in a neighborhood, they need food, they need to have access to social services, to cultural services and others. And this is the contribution of social NGOs to the social net and also to the welfare state in our countries. So I think this is important to know. The difficulty, for sure, if you look to a network like ours, we have 9 million members. 8.99 may not know that I am part of Solidar. And 8.99 may not consider that I have to speak here, but I do it. And I do it because we are a Solidar part of the social platform, which is the gathering of the social NGOs. We are part of the platform of the development NGOs, and also we work with the lifelong learning organizations. And we have been, 4 years ago, when the new commission started, we have been creating a network which was called Spring Alliance together with the European Trade Union Confederation. What has been said here? Well, I was sitting here and was thinking, another funeral services. Because, well, we are perhaps in the emergency room. The question is on which side of the emergency room we live. And if you have a funeral services, this question is what kind of music would accompany these funeral services. So I was thinking for sure, first of all, to my preferred band, which is Jim Morrison and the Doors. This is the end. Okay. So you see, this was a little bit what I heard today. But on the other side, when I was listening to Professor Galbraith, well, what you were proposing is remind me the Ramones. Yeah. Give me shock treatment. Yeah. And I think this is certainly the sense which we have to consider. And by listening to Mr. Flassbeck, well, Germany, the winner takes it all. And there we are at the risk. Yeah, it's not funny, because I myself have been involved in long years in the Franco-German cooperation, and I can say you it is really new that for the first time in France, in a country which was very much committed to Franco-German cooperation within and for Europe, that people address to you as German. And when they address to you, it's not because of the Franco-German friendship, it is because of the wrong policy of the German government, and it is on this unacceptable behavior of this government and these policies towards the other European citizens, and I'm not speaking only of Greece. So I think this makes a necessity why, even if I'm not an economist, we have a necessity to contribute to the debate, and I think it is important what you have been setting here, because we discuss on progressive reforms. First of all, let's be clear, what is progressive? What do we understand? And what can be progressive can only be social progress. Social progress means less exclusion, less poverty, more employment, more decent work, better wages, and so on. This is still progressive policies. The question is how to put them in place. Because the word reform has been abused in the last 10 years and still continues to be abused. We have Commissioner Andor. Luckily, he starts to take over the annual growth survey and the European semester. But he is not in a majority position, may I say. Because the question is, how are the reforms that the European Union recommends to the member states as a frame of what we call country-specific recommendations or national reform programs? What do we have inside? Flexible labor markets, competition on low wages, so everything that you have been mentioned just to say this is the wrong pathway, this is not the way where it should go. And I think this is why we cannot accept a policy that continues, which is only looking on competitiveness and in competition and not on construction. Last year there was a conference here where Susan George was speaking, and she was speaking not on the triple A but on the triple R. Reject, reform and reconstruct. And I think you have been saying the similar things, because we have to reject the policies, but this means we need also to work on majority political opinions. And I think the first round that we had this afternoon made it very clear that it is difficult, not only in Germany, not only in Austria. It is very difficult to convince. It is not because social democracy is old and last century, no. It is because the values that we have been fighting for, that we stand for, are not values which are valid for majority of people. There is indoctrination in the last 30 years of individualism, consumerism, and so on. How can you build a society based on solidarity and based on sharing values? How can you develop a more fair society if people are not ready? Because they all think poverty are the others, that's me not. But when they are concerned, then all they claim for the state or for social NGOs, somebody should do something. And I think this is a little bit the difficulty in which we are. And Dierk Hirschel, you should not underestimate the work that has started in the last 2-3 years here also within the Party of European Socialists. We as an NGO contribute to it, and we are listened to, and also you as a trade union contribute to it, because there's a necessity not of developing a new narrative, that means selling something under new terms, which is old policy, but how to redefine in these times of crisis, which is a crisis of the whole Europe. And there is no fire in this house yet, but there is danger in the house. And I think this is why it is necessary to speak out the truth that has been spoken out and to discuss on the remedies. I think it is very valid that the DGB has started to submit a proposal. We need to continue because we need to calculate also. And show by the figures, not only that more equal societies are less expensive and have a lower social cost, but also that investment pays. And I think here you also should see that there are some struggles, some debates on the European level, because we have, and I'm lucky to say it here, there is a social investment package. Perhaps nobody has heard of it, or only few. But there is also the question on how to reverse this tendency, how to decide how to have investment in real economy, in social policies, in social economy, in social infrastructure. I think this is really a major challenge of what we understand, not only to reject these policies, not only to reform, but to reconstruct. And perhaps there's a way to get people out of the emergency room. For sure, and you said it, there is a challenge for the societal concept, not only the question of equality and inequality and gender equality. There is also the question of the growth paradigm, and for sure the crisis should not be some kind of pretext to say we leave the climate change behind. No, climate change is affecting us, and by surprise, surprise, climate change is affecting poor people. And climate change is creating migration. And surprise, surprise, even in a country like Germany, along the Elbe River and others, you can also see what does it mean. There are climate change and the consequences that you don't have any more rain, but you have a tropical rain. Perhaps we should discuss on it. But the question is always, if this is true, if we are convinced and we have proposals for the way to do it, how can we connect? And I think we should not get into a competition on saying who is more intelligent or less intelligent or better rooted or has better ideas. The question is alliance building. Alliance building means alliance of progressive, means trade union movement, and means civil society. And means also to get out of this room, and perhaps to all the Germans like me in this room, what can we do to put this on a public place and a debate in our own country, in Germany? Because if you look to the media, this is not taking place. Perhaps I read not enough Taz. There's another reason. Perhaps I should. But
yes, you should.
You can send me, I will read it. But the question is, indeed, how can we bring out what we know, what we are convinced of, and the concepts we have, how can we bring them into a societal debate? I must say I was disappointed from our candidate, Steinbrück, when he came to Brussels. He said, Europe will not play a major role in the campaign. I said, I'm not convinced, and I think that you're completely wrong. It is not a debate on the future of Europe, but it has very much to do with what has been said on the wrong choices that Germany is doing, and Flassbeck explained it, and on the right choices that France is doing. We should discuss. And don't forget, when Lionel Jospin introduced the week of 35 hours, a long time ago, not so long, but we have forgotten what was the consequences, increase of domestic demand, the feeling of well-being, and an increase also of the birth rate. So where's the problem? The problem is that we forget immediately what has happened 10 or 15 years ago, and perhaps we should also think on how to introduce this and not always have to suffer from this amnesia, speak out the truth, commit amnesia, and do something which in my understanding and our understanding is absolutely necessary, and I will conclude on this. We have to consider that there is now a time for the progressives. If we consider that we are progressive, I'm still convinced that I'm progressive, to do something which is perhaps not the most modern term, but everybody will understand. there is a necessity for some kind of new Aufklärung, of new enlightenment. I do not think that all the citizens can still follow what are the decisions which are taken here, but it is up to us to translate it. And also not to be teachers, but to explain what is happening and where are possibilities for change. And change need other political majorities, and this is why we need alliances. Number two, yes, indeed, we have to consider the real economy and investment policies. But we also have to reconsider that something what we are doing is quite strong, and this is called social economy. Social economy is 12% of employment and of economy, roughly in Europe, and works under other circumstances. The question of decent work and decent wages, I think this is very clear. And I think also in a very old-fashioned tradition, why not tackling again this question of redistribution of wealth? Because wealth there is, we can, and the question is only how can we develop policies, find a new majority, and speak to those middle class or others that they are not only victims, but they are victims in particular of lies which are spread, and there is an alternative of another social model. And I think perhaps in this, let me conclude, we should perhaps think, when we think on music, once again on Jimmy Boyce and the Doors on this famous song, Break On Through, because there's a need for a break on through. And then we may also think on Bob Marley, get up, stand up, fighting for your rights. We don't need to smoke with it, but we just can sing this song. Thank you.
You can say now the music's over. No, thank you very much, Conny Reuter. The evening now is the time is it's late in the evening already. So I don't want to really provoke you with questions on my side, but I will give you on the other hand the possibility now to react to one another if you want on the floor. And the other, if not, I would also already give to the audience to give some inputs. But the first possibilities you have on the floor, if you want to comment on something which was mentioned during the last hour. Okay, then we open to the audience.
Yes, I have one question. I mean, Mr. Reuter said that you should build alliances. And I would ask for an alliance, what do you think about it, that was not yet mentioned. Perhaps it would be possible, despite the fact that it sounds very improbable, that you could have an alliance with the privileged classes. If you, I mean, Mr. Galbraith had this historical example of the Great Depression from 29 to 33, and then finally Roosevelt was voted for. But of course Roosevelt himself was straight from the upper classes. I mean, his father never ever worked in the whole of his life because the Roosevelt family was so rich. And in the end, not all of the privileged classes, but many of the elites in the United States somehow accepted the tax policies because they knew that if there wasn't a New Deal, the whole economy would crash. And could you imagine something happening like this again? Because, for example, if the euro crashed, then of course very many of the very wealthy would lose a lot of money because many of their money is invested in the South. So could you imagine a political situation where the wealthy somehow come to understand that they have to rescue the euro and that they have to, as Mr. Flassbeck explained, raise the salaries and that they have to invest in the South in order to save the euro? Or is it, because basically you all said that somehow these trade unions or the social movements or whatever should somehow rescue the euro, but the wealthy never ever came into picture, so that's why I asked this question.
Well, that's a very challenging question. First point I would make is that between 1929 and 1933, the crash actually occurred. But at the same time, this did not reconcile the Mellons and the other leaders of high privilege in American life to Roosevelt. The battle went right on through this period. What was necessary was a political coalition that overwhelmed the captains of industry and finance whose position was weakened because of the collapse of the banks. And Roosevelt's first act was to close all the banks for 10 days and only allow those to reopen which were solvent, worthy of confidence, into which deposit insurance could be effectively introduced, and then those banks survived. So that, I think, is part of the situation. The application of that principle in Europe is complicated by the cross-cutting division along national lines. It's not just rich people, but rich countries. One point to make about that, though, which may be helpful, is that the country which is in the dominant position, which is Germany, has a tradition, was built on the principle of social solidarity and of social market from the very beginning. It was rescued in the aftermath of the Second World War by a policy that was not financially punitive, unlike the Versailles Treaty, right? And ultimately by the Marshall Plan, which helped to create a viable economy in the whole of Western Europe, but especially in Germany. And the principle of solidarity was applied again with German reunification in a very serious way. And I think it was necessary to do so. Otherwise, the disruption of people would have been even more serious than in fact it was. And I think it is something where if ideas have to change, and they have to change especially in the country which is in a position to determine the policy of Europe, then it's important to recognize that that country has a historical tradition which is different from the recent policy and conformable to what has to be done. One other point on just the redistribution of wealth, since you raised it as well. There is a time dimension to this. And going back to the other Roosevelt theater, a feature of the tax code of the United States has been that there's been a rather heavy tax on estates and gifts, which is remitted if you put the money in a charitable or philanthropic institution, which is the universities, the healthcare system, the churches, a lot of foundations. This has the effect of recycling wealth very substantially. It's not the world's most elegant system, and it has a lot of problems associated with it. But nevertheless, the accumulated wealth in hands not directly fully controlled by the contributing family employs about 8% of the American workforce. A very large sector for which I believe there's really no counterpart here, where these functions, health, education, so forth, purely public. But one consequence of that is that they're substantially larger, the social economy in the U.S. as a share of the total, if you look at health and higher education and so forth, than it is here. And that employs a lot of people, including me, for example.
If I may, well, I don't want to depress you too much for tonight.
I am already depressed.
You're depressed already, okay, then it's okay, then I go in. But the point is, you see, that for me there are two ways. Either, first of all, we're going to win the economic debate right now, up to in the next half year or whatever it is, not too long. Either we're winning the debate about the right economic policy, and that's a debate about economics. I'm sorry to say that people who do not engage in economics are welcome, but they have to deal with economics, otherwise it doesn't work. Either we're winning this debate, where I wouldn't say that it's hopeless, but everybody knows it's extremely difficult. And as long as it is such that as long as the commissioner says something about German wages and the next day the whole German media write, oh, what a strange idea. Where does this man get his ideas from? As long as such in Germany, it will be very difficult. But we're trying hard to do what is necessary. But my hope is limited. The probability that this is going to happen timely, that we're turning around the whole economic policy debate, is very, very small. Or the whole thing collapses. Let's be sure. There is no third way. There is no muddling through. If you continue with the austerity, if you continue with the wage cuts, even given the paradox that I told you about the IMF in my statements, given all this, Europe will go another 3-4 quarters, will remain in recession, and will maybe be stabilized at a very, very low level. But this, democracies cannot survive. Democracies cannot survive infinite recessions and unemployment of 25-30%. Even if there's stabilization, look at the ridiculous forecasts, sorry, Mr. Commissioner, of the Commission, that are, James said it, they're always revised the next year in the same way. As long as we have this kind of looking into something that will never happen, and we do not realize that even if there would be stabilization, 25% unemployment or 30% unemployment do not go away quickly. It takes 30, 40, 50 years to overcome such a crisis once, even if you are successful in turning it around once. But at this moment, we have not taken one measure to turn it around, not one measure. So what do you expect? What are people going to vote for in countries that are desperately searching for a solution for the new poverty that they have and all these dramatic developments? What do you think? Sooner or later, in all these countries, and we have seen it already in a number of countries, people will vote for something totally different, and we won't like it. Nobody will like it because it will be anti-European. It will be nationalist. Let's be clear about that. It will be nationalist parties that come up and promise something that they cannot deliver, for sure, but that's not important then anymore.
Dierk, you just want to comment short?
I'm quite skeptical as well if we debate about the role of the economic elites in my country. I mean, in the 70s, we had some macroeconomic thinking within the employers' organizations. Yeah? Kind of macroeconomic logic against the logic of the firms. But that's all over. It doesn't exist anymore within the employers' organization. They just represent the logic of the firm in their thinking, in their writings. And the problem is that the export-oriented sector doesn't care for the domestic demand in my country. Yeah? Volkswagen, for example, they export 70% of the cars they produce in Germany. 70% of these cars are exported, so they don't depend on the economic growth of the domestic market. They depend on the economic growth of China, of the US, of the UK, and so on. Yeah, so I don't see the willingness of the export-oriented sector to change the political strategy. The same is true for the small and mid-cap companies. Yeah, they represent the neoliberal thinking as well. It's contradictions because they depend on the domestic demand. Yeah, but if you talk to them, if you see their writings, it's the same. It's the austerity approach they are pushing forward. It's the cost-cutting strategies and so on. Yeah. So no macroeconomic thinking along the small and mid-cap companies, and I don't have to talk about the financial sector. Yeah. So if we're talking about the economic elites in Germany, there is no sign of a turnaround, of a new thinking or something like that. So everything depends on the strength of the unions. Fortunately, membership is growing. yeah, IG Metall, the strongest German union, increased their membership last year and this year. The same is true for my organization, for the United Service Sector Union. So with increasing strength of the union, we are able to stimulate domestic demand. Wages are increasing in Germany for 2 years now, with a rate of more than 3%, which is compared to the past, successful wage policy. Yeah, not enough. Yeah, I agree with Heiner Flassbeck. Not enough, but if we consider that we have the second biggest low wage sector after behind the US, yeah, that's not as bad. Yeah, so strengthening the union is a strategy, and we have to. We have to debate and we have to influence the Social Democrats in my country, that they have to change their political approach. That's the only way for a turnaround. Yeah? But if you count on the economic elites in my country, you are lost.
Andreas Breitenfelder.
I like very much what all of you on this table said, and this might only surprise you when you hear that I'm working with the DG team, and otherwise I would very much agree with most which has been said so far. Of course, there are minor details we can debate. Like, for example, that Mr. Flassbeck, that only labor costs determine inflation in the mid-run or long-run, whatever. That is true, but you have to keep in mind that the ECB is giving very clear signal what exceptions she's ready to accept. And therefore, employers and trade unions, in general sense, are accepting more or less the leading rule of the ECB in this sense, and that's the reason why real unit labor costs, together with inflations over the last, since the euro has been introduced more or less, on average have been exactly this 2% you are asking for. So I think it's no clear contradiction, but I think it's a bit too strong your statement that central banks have nothing to do with it. Of course they do, but trade unions certainly do. Yeah? I mean, this is clear. And if there is a conflict between central banks and trade unions in this sense, then it's, I mean, usually a big crisis. Yeah? But since, as I've learned, that time is a fixed resource, let me just mention that some of your statements here on the table sounded a bit like contradictions. I think people here have noticed this. Contradictory to each other. Yeah? So, for example, in Coote, you were rather arguing in favor of a kind of slow or no growth or whatever mode, and this Marshall Plan, of course, is at the first sight, I mean, tending exactly in the other direction. And I mean, these signals, of course, make it for the broader public probably very difficult to follow you. Yeah? And I mean, just to give you an idea how this can be matched in a sense. Yeah? I mean, slow growth. I mean, we are actually in a mode of no growth or negative growth, recession. Whatever it is, a recession, whatever. Yeah? So in this sense, I mean, introducing a plan like this would at least lead into the directions. Okay, we would avoid losing more space. Yeah? But still, I think it's important to keep in mind that we could not continue on a fast growth track as we thought that this might continue in the last decade. So it's clear. And therefore, I still think that the Marshall Plan, this idea of the Marshall Plan, is really the most important short-term measure. Although it's planned for 10 years, but in a sense it's short-term because it could start right now, more or less. Yeah? While, for example, wage policies, Mr. Weidenholzer, you mentioned, I mean, would take